Good afternoon.
Hello. Oh, I can't see everyone. How do I see everyone? Is that the view? Oh, that's better. I can see everyone now. I'll mute myself.
Good afternoon, Councillor Swift.
Good afternoon, Jeanette. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's just gone to, just doing a moment just to see if anybody else was coming in, but I think we're all ready to go. I think the live streaming is sorted, Jeanette, so we're
It is.
online. Yes, thank you. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the West Yorkshire Combined Authorities Place Panel. Item 1 is to check for any apologies. Jeanette, can you update me on those?
Yes, there's apologies from Councillor Hinchcliffe and Andrew Latchmore and Jackie Gedman.
Thank you, Jeanette. Nobody aware of any more? If I can remind people, should at the start, I think everybody is doing, to put yourselves on mute when not speaking. If you want to speak on any item, I will try and notice any raised hands, but it's often easier if people use the chat, if that's okay. I know sometimes if you're using iPads, it's not so easy to access the chat, but I'll look for that first. I'll look for any raised hands that I might miss otherwise. Item 2 is to remind members to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests that you may have in any items on the agenda. And you can either do that now or on the particular items when they arise. I'm not seeing anybody. Yes, Jane, Councillor Scullion.
Declare an interest as a member of the Yorkshire and Humberside Flooding and Coastal Resilience Committee. Haven't necessarily got those initials in quite the right order, but I've previously registered that interest, so I'm sure officers will be able to sort it out.
Thank you. Okay. Item 3, exempt information. There are no items for which we need to exclude the press and public, and I don't think there are any exempt documents. Item 4 is the minutes of the place panel held on the 28th of July. Could I ask if anybody has any points of accuracy about those? Again, not seeing anyone. So are we happy to agree those as a correct record? I'll just see hands for anybody. Everyone happy to agree those? Thank you. So those are agreed. Item 5 is the place narrative. This is an update on the place narrative, which we had a presentation on at the panel in 28th at our last meeting, 28th of July. And I'll ask Alison to introduce this item.
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. So this paper, you'll recall at the last meeting in July that I gave a presentation on the place narrative, which was a document that you had asked us to look to put together at your place panel inception meeting. And we looked at the progress that we've made towards full content of that draft. So this paper is really an update on that position. So we do now have a full draft of the document. So it's an online interactive document, as we discussed at your last meeting. We've been through an internal brief consultation phase, and we've obviously written this document in partnership with our local authorities, but it has also been to district officers for some initial comments. We have obviously shared by email now the link to all place panel members, and we're keen to get your input on this early draft as the sort of commissioners of the document, if you like. So we are looking for comments up until the 20th of November, please. So it's a relatively long period of time to make sure that we can capture your sort of detailed reflections. I'm happy for you to email me any comments, or if you'd like to make any alternative arrangements, I'm happy to have one-to-one meetings or group sessions on it as appropriate, whatever you think will work best to capture your comments. I have included in the paper 5 key questions at paragraph 2.6. So don't feel limited by those questions. We are happy to receive feedback on all your reflections, including obviously as a useful starting point whether it meets the brief as you saw it for this piece of work. But just to talk through some of those questions that are included in the paper. So we're obviously interested in your feedback on how usable the document is. So using it as an interactive document, do you find it easy to navigate to the content that you're interested in? in the introductory section where we talk about our places, we're keen to find out whether what we've included in there is useful, and particularly whether it brings out the diversity of our region, which is something that as a panel you have picked up on a few times in thinking through the content. We've got in the challenge section, we've got 6 spatial challenges included in there, and I've listed those in your paper. Those build on what we discussed at the previous meeting. So we had 3 headings as areas for focus in the challenge section, which were people, housing and environment. And what we've done is target 6 key challenges relating to those 3 headings. So again, as that sort of new information for the panel, we'd welcome your reflections on whether those are the right challenges. So they've been chosen because they all have a spatial element and because they underpin our approach to infrastructure investment. So that's how they've been selected, but your feedback on that would be useful. The investment section is fairly straightforward. It's a high-level summary of what we're currently investing in, but whether it's a useful overview or not will be welcome feedback. And then
hiya, can you
sorry, I don't know who that was. Should I continue? So,
yes, please. Yeah.
So the last one is a specific one, really. So at point 2.25 in the actual online document, there's a series of maps for the 4 different areas of the city region as we've presented them, and they focus on connections, business and retail and entertainment, culture and heritage, and universities. And we're really flexible with the amount of information we can include in those sections. So we'd be really keen to get some additional points and content to populate those maps to give a sense of what places are all about. So that is all I was going to say today, really. So we're looking forward to receiving your feedback and working with you to shape the content further. And please obviously do get in touch if you have any difficulties accessing the document.
Thanks very much for that introduction, Alison. Are there any questions or comments on the paper and the points raised in it? Not seeing any at the moment. Helen, you've seen the comment you put in the chat. I don't know whether you want to add to that. It's really about helping presenting elsewhere, but do you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry,
go on. No, sorry, go on, Helen.
It's just I had a look at it and it was great, and the questions I think are really pertinent, and I wanted to be able to share it with the other housing association partners for their contribution, because I think we'd probably have quite a bit to contribute, but I understand that you don't want me to share the live link, so Alison's offered to give me some slides so that I can share it and we can give a proper consultation by the 20th.
Yeah, that's fine. So I'll make sure that everybody gets access to those slides if you want to share it with others. But then it is worth noting that this is an initial consultation phase until the 20th, just to get your feedback. There will be further opportunities beyond that when we're content with the draft to share it more widely and get input before it becomes a final document.
Okay. Thanks, Alison. So we're particularly looking for comments from this panel and our organisations on those questions that are set out in 2.6. Amir, you wanted to come in?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, just regarding the 6 challenges and sort of the method. I mean, they're obviously very important areas, but one of the things that I sort of find is that, you know, we sometimes seem to be sort of preaching to the converted, and so as soon as we have an initiative, it's great for people that are interested in that initiative and can respond to it and do so, and then they obviously benefit, but there's a lot of people that don't, and so I just kind of wondered what your approach was for trying to reach into communities and places where there isn't necessarily high levels of engagement.
Thanks. Probably goes a little beyond this process, but Alison, do you want to say anything on that?
Yeah, so I think what we're interested in this document is how we present the evidence that that indicates how our most deprived communities are disadvantaged for a number of reasons, and that we do have opportunities through the way that we invest in infrastructure to try and tackle some of those issues. But because it's such a strategic piece of work, I don't think it's going to tackle that specific question that you've raised, Amir, but I am interested for your views as you read the detail of the narrative as to whether we can strengthen it in any way to try and address that concern. But I'm not totally sure that this piece of work is going to unlock that issue.
Yeah, I think often we should be picking up and building into this messages that are coming from our individual councils and partner organisations, and much of that work should perhaps be taking place at that level. But it's important that it is happening. But take Alison's point about the strategic nature of this document and how we balance those things. As the agenda says, this is broadly setting out the process for the next change rather than discussing the detail, which we spent quite some time on at this time. So people happy to note the progress and questions and accept the process, and we'll no doubt get a further update at our next meeting. Is that okay with everybody? Okay, thank you very much. So I'll take us on to item 6, urban design support. This is an update on the programme. I'm going to ask Helen Foreman, the design manager at the Combined Authority, to talk us through the paper. So over to you, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just sharing my screen now. Hopefully you can see that.
I can, assume everybody else. Yeah.
Great. Okay. And I found a nifty little tool this morning, which is this pointer. Can you see that moving around on the screen? Like a laser pointer?
Yes.
Yes, good, excellent. That'll be handy.
Slight delay, but
right,
yes.
okay. Okay, so the last time I updated you was in January, and shortly after that I sent out a report to the members of the panel, which was the first part of the urban design support work, which was to assess the urban design resource in the Leeds City region and identify gaps in that resource. And just in the paper, there's more detail, but I thought I would make this presentation just to kind of highlight some key points and make the work a little bit more tangible. This was a key question in one of the initial survey questions that put together that report, and the question was, how important do you feel each of the following methods are towards helping to improve design skills within your organisation? So you can see the local authorities that responded put a high priority on sharing best practice training, and a slightly less high priority on cross-borough coordination and consultancy and advice. As we probed a bit further into that through further meetings and workshops, a sort of long list of these 8 proposals were put together and scored, and the top 4 that are shaded there were prioritised for getting on with straight away. So the paper, as I said, gives a bit more detail on where that support's been directed and what's been achieved so far. But today I just wanted to make it a little bit more tangible, and so I thought it would help to look at an example of where I think it's made a real difference. So this is a planning application that came into one of our local authorities recently. In the place panel workshop, it's almost exactly a year ago today, I made a presentation claiming that urban design had many impacts, including physical and mental health, inclusion, carbon emissions, climate change adaptation, and community benefits. And I think this example starts to show how this can happen. So the plan on the left was submitted for planning, and officers in both planning and highways were very disappointed in the layout, in that the roads were wide. There was an over provision of parking spaces for the sort of level of car ownership that was prevalent in the area. there was public woodlands to the north here that were inaccessible by the residents, and there was a proposed key cycle route into the city centre from these woodlands that was being blocked by this development. So this combination of factors, it's not that unusual in new development, and leads to a reliance on the car and resulting health, climate change, and or climate and community impact. So this is the before image, and through a series of meetings with the local authority, the architect and myself, we made some changes to the layout without impacting on housing numbers. We reduced the parking considerably. The access to this woodland was provided through these key linkages through the site. In addition, open space, which was shown here and here, sort of on the real edges of the development, and not necessarily in a place that would attract much recreational, good recreational use, were moved into the site. So there's a key sort of green path through the site here, and play areas in the centre and at the edges, but also on key routes through the site here. So that those are more overlooked and more likely to be used in a positive way. And just as another point, you might remember in that place panel workshop, I talked about children and the importance of children and their safe independence in a neighbourhood, and how if we design for children, we can get other people using the space as well. So there's evidence to show that if you use sort of loops around a site, very small loops, and this is something that might have kind of become a bit more obvious through COVID, as well as people start doing those having short recreational kind of uses around their neighbourhood. If children are allowed to have this safe independence around the neighbourhood through these short walking loops, it's shown that that's replicated with adult activity as well. So that's just sort of one example very quickly to show how urban design support's made a difference. But more broadly, I've set up a network of planning, highways and design colleagues from authorities across the Leeds City region and beyond. The network was launched just in time on the 6th of March at Wellington House. So hopefully not a super spreader event, but we brought together lots of planning and design colleagues from local authorities, and focused on design guidance and design review tools to share our expertise on those. So since then things have moved online. You can see here the LinkedIn group that we've formed to bring those members together, over 100 members with a common interest in placemaking and urban design. I've also run a set of training design webinars over the summer. The subjects in orange are the ones that were run by the Combined Authority, and the ones in blue were ones that I helped Selby District deliver. And the training will resume later this year. All the sessions that have taken place so far are on our YouTube channel and are still being watched there. But thinking ahead into the future, the MHCLG funding will allow this programme to continue in its current form until May 2022. But we're thinking beyond that to what it might look like under a devolved region, and taking on board feedback from colleagues on the work done so far. So here are some of the things. I think I'm probably running out of time, so I won't read those out, but here's some of the things we might focus on going forward. So today I was just really looking for to update you and welcome any comments on the work done so far, or what you think would be beneficial in the future.
Thank you, Helen. Very clear presentation and good examples. Can I see, are there anyone with any questions or comments on this work today, perhaps particularly on the pieces going ahead? Yes, Peter, Councillor McBride.
Yeah, I think issues of design are going to be in future what we're about. If you look at the bigger issue, the white paper, it's going to take away all our significant powers over things that really matter. So we were left with the responsibility of arranging the deck chairs while the main shipping issue is determined in another space. And it won't even be at regional level, it will be at national level. And I think that will be brought out when we come to the white paper.
This is the planning white paper, yes. The
Yeah.
planning, yeah.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. We perhaps pick that up a little more. I'm certainly struggling, not a planning expert, struggling myself to understand some of the tensions between what's being said about the importance of good design by government and the white paper, but no doubt others will pick up that up. Councillor, sorry, I've lost my chats. Councillor Musgrave and then Councillor Waller.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say how well received the work at Selby District Council had been. The Design Academy has really added some value to what we're doing there, and hopefully embeds into our planning process and our decision-making process the need for really high quality design. I think we're starting to see the fruits of that work already in some of the applications that are coming through. So that's been really well received. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Very pleased to hear that.
Thank you. Councillor Waller, did you want to come in, or was that just a comment?
I think it would be, because there are such substantial changes being proposed to, in effect, reduce local influence on planning applications, whether that would be lost. So this refinement of proposals to ensure more sustainable transport links is something that might be lost.
Yeah, I think that's
sorry,
Helen. Yeah.
Did you?
No.
Yes.
To you, Helen. Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot in the planning reform paper, and there's a lot of pushback against it as well. And one of the things I think is positive about it is the plan to bring the community involvement forward to the local plan stage, which, if it's done correctly, could work quite well. It's often too late to change things once the planning application comes in. So I think that is something that could be positive, but a lot of the ideas from the white paper, like the design coding, are not, they're just ideas that are put out there and not developed sufficiently to see how they'll actually work. And when I've been talking to those that have that were on the panel suggesting the changes, that they're really seeking our feedback on those proposals. They've just said it's deliberately vague and we want you to feedback. So that's exactly what we're doing. But I think it's far from clear at the moment how things will change.
Thank you. Anyone else looking to come in, or are we happy to note the progress so far and say thank you again for the presentation and move on? I'm not seeing anyone. Oh, Amir, yes, sorry.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to ask whether, given the really sort of really deep-rooted problems that we've got in the community, such as sort of disenfranchisement, loneliness, issues around sort of segregation and sort of a lot of siloed communities, whether it actually goes far enough. I mean, if we kind of go back a little part way in history and sort of see where the things that people would have caused the interactions, whether that was a pub, the laundrette, the cafe, the shops, the things that would have allowed people to get to know their neighbours, get to know those things are largely have either disappeared or are disappearing. And my concern is that we end up with quite sterile housing estates. And I think that when we start looking at sort of the point that I mentioned earlier as well, I think urban design has got a really, really massive role to play in creating interaction, creating opportunity to exposure to things that are going on. The whole sort of health and wellness agenda is now recognized as being much more to do with having a job, a reason to get up in the morning, social interactions, than it is about clinical biomedical care. And I think that it's really critical, especially in some of our more challenging areas, that urban design does create and does understand that wider context and does understand how this community fits in with things that are going on around it. And I just wondered whether, I mean, so from the examples that they're quite isolated, so I don't know the wider context, but I do think that's an absolutely critical part of the urban design sort of proposition, is that sort of sense of animation that creates the community and builds the communities, and I'm not sure that's really evident
in the white paper.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd wholeheartedly agree. And I think first comes designing the streets so that they're not dominated by cars and encourage people to walk and cycle more. But also there are positive things about the COVID experience, in that people they're living in their neighborhoods and they're living and working there. And I think the whole idea, I don't know if you've heard about the 15-minute neighborhood or the 20-minute neighborhood, where there should be facilities, most facilities that you need in your day-to-day life close to your home. And I think that's been given a big push by COVID, and I would be quite optimistic about that as a really powerful tool to help us get those social connections day to day.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that kind of, whether we refer it to 15 minutes or what, I think we want to see that up as a part of our, really as part of our vision. I think it feeds back into the placemaking narrative as well, doesn't it? We want our communities to be places where it's easy for people to get around on foot, on bikes, in different ways, and have easy access to the facilities that are physically based. I guess the tension in the other way from COVID is the shift towards less physical facilities and more online. So there is a bit of a tension between the two. But I suspect most of our experiences will have been quite markedly that the change in use of local facilities that happened during lockdown has continued. It may have reduced, but people are genuinely more engaged with their neighbourhoods than they were beforehand, because perhaps they're more aware of what's there now as well. But I think it's a really important theme going forward. I'm not seeing anybody else, so thank you for the comments on that. Thank you for the presentation, Helen.
Thank you.
And I take that we're happy to endorse that as a direction of as the continuing direction of travel. Thank you. Item 7 is a Towns Fund update. I'll ask Judith to introduce this, and also welcome Lorraine Coates from Bays, who's going to talk to this item. So Judith, do you want to start this?
So yes, this was just a quick update really. A number of our districts are involved in Towns Fund. I think we've got Wakefield submitting Wakefield in by the end of this month. And then I think the majority of town investment plans are moving towards submission in the new year. There's been a lot of activity across support for those Towns Fund boards. I just thought I'd invite Laura along, really to give a little bit of feedback in terms of the first cohort of schemes that was submitted was it back in June. And then how we can build and as a combined authority support our districts moving forward. So if it's okay, Chair, if Lorraine can take over from here.
Yes, of course.
Hello, colleagues. Sorry, my camera is not working today, so it's just me. What I'd planned to do, although it may not be appropriate from what Judith just said, is just to briefly run through some of the main points about the fund, what it's designed to do and what interventions are in scope, and maybe something about the process, and then reflect on cohort 1 as far as I'm able to, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, so colleagues may remember that this fund was originally announced quite a long time ago now, last September. We then saw an increase in the total size of the pot, and we have 101 towns nationally who've been invited to bring forward proposals. And as Judith says, and I think the paper says, that's 8 within West Yorkshire. There are also 4 places that have been invited to bring forward proposals for the Future High Streets Fund. I think by the time the further guidance was issued in June this year, the world had changed, of course. And I think the guidance recognises that. And Simon Clarke, who was then the Minister for Regional Growth and Local Government at the time, of course, made the point that the fund would take on further purpose in helping towns to recover and rebound from the pandemic. But a really important message that town boards are grappling with as they're getting on with the work is that the overarching objective of the fund remains to drive the sustainable economic regeneration of our towns for long-term economic and productivity growth. It's going to be really important for town deal boards and local authority partners to keep that in mind as we go forward with town investment proposals submission. So it's probably worth also mentioning that this is a capital fund. So the kinds, and we've set out the types of interventions in scope that can be supported through the fund. And I don't think these will be a surprise to anyone. So local transport, digital connectivity, urban regeneration planning and land use, arts, culture and heritage, skills infrastructure and enterprise infrastructure. And another important point is that it's for town deal boards to work out through evidence and research and engagement which of these themes are most important and appropriate to them. And it's from this consideration that they will take decisions about their priorities for projects. Judith has mentioned the deadlines for the different cohorts. The only thing I would add to that is that just this week we've introduced a new cohort, 2A. So the deadline for that is the 11th of December, if places wish to take up that opportunity. But again, it's for town deal boards to decide when they submit. And our strong advice is to submit when you are ready, when you are absolutely confident about the quality of the investment plan and the projects that are being proposed. I mean, just briefly to mention the next stages after town investment plan submissions. So based on a national cross-government assessment of those, government will offer heads of terms to towns, and once they are agreed, local places will then get on with developing the detail of the projects that they wish to take forward. There's quite a long period of time for that to happen. It's a big job depending on how many projects you've got. But my feeling is that places may wish to try and speed that up or not use the maximum amount of time available for that, which is up to 12 months. We've asked, and again, because of the membership of this group, it's worth saying that we've asked local authorities to play a really key role in the Towns Fund. So we've asked them to act as the accountable body, to provide assurance on the proposal submitted, and then assurance on the business case, development and value for money of the projects that come forward. So we're really grateful for all the work that's been done up to now, particularly in such challenging times. I think really great progress has been made in West Yorkshire, as Judith said. There's a huge amount of work taking place and all at a very fast pace. So what have we learned from cohort 1? So important to note that we've not yet offered heads of terms for cohort 1, but we expect that to be very soon now. So anything I say now has got a kind of health warning on it because we've not actually reached the end of the process. I think probably the biggest message that's come out from many places is the importance of establishing the golden thread, as it's been called, or the logic chain. So you can see how the evidence base of the town directly links to the vision, and then directly links to the projects that are proposed, and that the projects are convincing in terms of how they will actually deliver the desired outcomes. I mean, that is a kind of really important message. It sounds obvious and simple, but I'm not sure that everybody had quite grabbed that at the start. I think another really straightforward message is, you know, we have set out in the guidance what the intervention framework is. So the types of interventions as set out are really broad. So there's lots of scope for local places to choose, you know, between them and how they want to deliver them. But the proposals that come forward would really struggle if they are not aligned with that intervention framework. What else? I think, well, governance is important, but I think we've pretty much got that cracked. Community engagement, incredibly important. I think from comments that have been made to me, some places didn't do themselves justice in terms of the documents that were put forward in relation to community engagement. That once there was a discussion about that, it became very quickly evident that the proposals were based on very much more than seemed to be suggested in the documents. And I suppose the final point I would make, and all of these are so simple, I'm sorry, nothing really sophisticated or clever here, but the final comment I would make is to bear in mind who the readers are. In terms of government, that is. So people like me will be involved in the assessment process, and hopefully I've got quite a lot of knowledge about West Yorkshire and our towns, but there will be lots of other people involved, and the messages have got to be really clear to them. And there's also a point, and this is generally the case, that we've set a maximum word limit, but people always want to say more. And there are some that have been submitted with very many lengthy annexes. And speaking frankly, that's not very helpful, because the people who are assessing these things are not going to have time, quite frankly, to go through all of that. So there really needs to be a block of time at the end of the development of the investment plan process for people to take a step back and maybe to involve a broader range of local people to read through the documents to make sure that the top messages, the most important messages, are delivered as clearly as they can be, because that will have the most impact. I think that's probably all I would say, and happy to take questions.
Thanks very much, Lorraine. I know these the schemes in all of our authorities. Are any questions or comments anybody has on the work to date? I've got Councillor Scullion.
Thank you, Lorraine. That was really helpful and really clear, and particularly the feedback from cohort 1, really clear and helpful. And as you say, the different projects, the different towns are in slightly different places, depending on the particular history of place. It was just a comment I made at one of our boards, I think it was last week, having tried to immerse myself in the website and the various bits of guidance and the videos and so on. And the 2 comments really. One was that the 2 worked examples, as it were, that are on the website are Greater Manchester and Greater Grimsby. And you look at those and you think, well, we're a town. We are distinctively a town. You look at Manchester and you look at Greater Grimsby and you think, whoa, these are not necessarily examples that inspire us, but intimidate us slightly. So I made that point to Richard Thorpe in particular. The other thing is, I'm pleased to hear you say that you continue to want to have that top message about distinctiveness, because there is always a danger when you do the checklist of the projects. You know, you've got something in about digital, you've got something in about greening the town centre, you've got something that they begin to look the same. And I would be really happy if government continued to keep the idea of towns being distinctive and having their own particular distinctive history that informs the projects that they put forward, really. So not so much a question, sorry, Chair, but very much a comment, and really grateful for the feedback from cohort 1. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Anybody else coming in with any questions or comments on this? Lorraine, is there anything you want to respond to what Jane just offered?
Oh, only briefly to welcome what she said and totally agree. If this fund is not about responding to the particular circumstances of towns and developing proposals that will meet the needs and opportunities of those towns, then it won't have done its job, quite frankly. And it's the usual thing, isn't it, about passing the TIPEX test? So if you took the name out, could you actually say where this place was and does it sound right? So couldn't agree more.
Thanks very much, Lorraine. Yeah, and very much agree about the TIPEX tests, which I think we've used in a few occasions over the years. Okay, thanks very much. So if we can agree then that we note that, and again record our thanks to Lorraine for coming along and updating us on that. Everybody okay with that? I'm seeing nods. Thank you very much. Item 8 is about the refresh of the spatial priority areas, and details are set out in the report, but Alison, can I ask you to introduce this, please?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Chair. Just to note, I keep getting a message that my internet connection is unstable, so please let me know if you lose me. So this report that's been included is a piece of work that we haven't yet discussed with you as a panel. So it provides an overview of some work that we've been undertaking internally over the last 6 months or so on refreshing our spatial priority areas. Many of you will have been involved through your own local councils in the work, but as a panel we haven't yet discussed it. So our spatial priority areas, or SPAs, are the largest or most strategic growth opportunities in our city region. That's how they were defined in the SEP, which is where they were first agreed. We've adjusted that definition slightly to say they're the largest or most strategic opportunities within our city region. So they were originally set out in the SEP in 2014, and then some additional SPAs were added in 2016, but then no further update had taken place since then. So the refresh that we've just gone through was triggered by one of our partner councils asking for an additional SPA. So as a result of that, we did a full call for new priorities internally through district officers. And then we also reviewed the categories and the criteria that sit behind those spatial priority areas. And that was particularly to reflect the fact that when they were originally written in the SEP, they were all very much centred around growth priorities. As I say, we've adjusted that title, and they're now more reflective of our wider policy priorities around regeneration, urban renewal, towns fund locations, a part of the criteria now, and some sort of economic and environmental resilience priorities as well. So the refresh has been a bottom-up process as described. We did a sort of call for new locations with all of the local authorities, and then the local authority officers have also helped with revising the criteria. We've also done some work internally to look at the alignment of the SPAs with our current pipelines. So that includes the housing pipeline that this panel's had some involvement in shaping, and then we've also looked at alignment with our existing investment pipelines, because some of them obviously extend quite far into the future. So there's a map been included as Appendix B of your report, which looks at how the SPAs
We were doing really well till then. We just lost you at that point, Alison.
Sit alongside the TCF schemes. So, can you hear me now?
Yeah, okay, again now.
Can you hear me now?
Mhm.
I'm not sure whether you you can hear me now. Okay, I'll continue then. So I was just saying that Appendix B is the map of the TCF scheme.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we've done some work to look at how the SPAs align with our pipelines, including the TCF schemes. So then the next point I was going to just discuss with you is so that in the paper at paragraph 2.8, that's the list of the current locations that we're proposing as SPAs. Appendix A shows those spatially on a map. So one of the things that we've tried to balance while we've been doing this update is to ensure that they're all broad strategic areas rather than individual sites, but equally that they're not so broad that further targeted work that we do to understand the infrastructure investments required becomes too difficult. So you'll see that we've applied a clustering approach in some locations. So where we've applied that is the Garden Village cluster and the North Kirklees growth zone. So I mean, as I say, you may have been involved in the work that the officers have been leading through the individual districts and feeding in on this, but I'm happy to take any comments or questions on the process or the list of the SPAs. Michael Long is also on the call, who has led on some of the district engagement and also the work around the site specifics on this piece. So again, Michael will be able to help with any specific questions, but really it was just to give you an update on where we were, that we have got a stable list now, and to get your sort of feedback on that work.
Thanks very much, Alison. So obviously this is one of those items that often people wonder why there's not more debate in this panel, but it's because a lot of the work will have already taken place in consultation with our councils in advance, hopefully. So looking for any comments. Peter, were you looking to come in?
Yes.
Thanks.
I was pleased that there's a reflection of the fact that I think initially we saw priority areas in terms of the priorities of districts. And as we've evolved and got a bit more sensible, I think we've realized that those priority areas cut across. So, for example, our biggest and Calderdale's actually are together as one. I'm talking about that Brighouse area and Bradley. If you put it together, it's probably the biggest area in all of West Yorkshire. And that's the way it should be seen. And again, our links with Chidswell and South East Leeds, that's an area, but it's not Kirklees and it's not Leeds, it's some combination. And by the same token, that will be true of other districts. And I think the more we can think like that, the better.
Thanks, Peter. Yes, I agree. I think that's one of the strengths of the new sets, isn't it? Anyone else want to comment on this before I bring Alison back in? Richard, yes.
Sorry, Chair, I'm trying to find the unmute button and the hands up button and everything else at the same time. So I went for the old-fashioned way. Just really keen. Obviously, I'm here representing Selby District, and so interested to know more about the Nottingley future growth area that's been identified, and would urge you to talk to the Selby District Council officers, because we are in the process of moving to our preferred options of our local plan process, and that's an area very much of interest to us as well. It's an obvious area with lots of good infrastructure there already, and a key growth area for us. So I'd urge to be joined up conversation around that, because it seems to be mutually beneficial to do so.
Yeah, thanks. Ask Alison to comment on that, but obviously that sort of connections were the benefit of maintaining the city region focus rather than just the WYCA one, I think, as well. Got Lisa as well, and I'll bring you back in, Alison, if that's okay. Lisa?
Thank you, Chair. Just really to add what was said previously by Peter, that clearly these can't be looked at in isolation. You have to look at the way in which the developments in one area impact upon a neighbouring area. And clearly, even if it's as simple as traffic flow or where people are going for employment, development in one area has a knock-on effect on a neighbouring area. So I just really sort of reiterate what Pete said in terms of looking at it holistically, but also when we're coming on to the planning reforms later on, the importance of the duty to cooperate and that being really meaningful and effective, because I think, you know, even currently that needs to be improved, but, you know, the risk of that being taken away altogether is very significant.
Thank you. Alison, do you want to come back in at this point?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So they're really helpful comments. Thank you very much for those reflections. I think the point about the boundaries is a really important one, and I think it is right. It's a reflection on the strength of the partnership, that we now have those clear priorities that do cross boundaries, and we work across boundaries very effectively, particularly I think in a planning context, and I take that point with regard to the white paper, and we can pick that up again at that point on the agenda. With regard to Selby, at the moment, currently, as you'll see, our spatial priorities are now limited to West Yorkshire, whereas previously we did have SPAs across the wider city region, and that really is to reflect the fact that our investment opportunities going forward will more than likely be West Yorkshire in the context of the devolution deal. But we are very much interested in the conversations with districts on the boundaries. The Nottingley priority has been put forward through Wakefield district officers, and that reflects the local plan allocations, the draft allocations in their plan, which is why it's in that future category. But more than happy to have a conversation with your officers and potentially in partnership with Wakefield as well to understand the sort of cross-boundary implications there.
That would be appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those comments. So I think we're happy to note and receive both the revised approach and the proposed list. Yes, clearly we'd look for these to feed in and complement the place narrative and the economic framework. Are people okay? Yep, plenty of nods and agreement to that one. Thank you. So item, let me see where I am. Item 8, item 9, housing affordability and needs study. So I think we've got Rebecca Greenwood with us to present this item. Rebecca, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I think this is the first time we're bringing this item to the place panel. So since February this year, which feels like a long time ago, we've been working on a city region-wide study with Sheffield Hallam University and North Housing Consulting to look at housing affordability and need across the Leeds city region. So the aim of this piece of work is recognising that I think the last time we did a sort of a bit of a look into and a deeper dive into affordability across the region was back in 2014. So quite some time ago that we've done this at a regional scale. And I think it's safe to say that this piece of work we've done this time has gone quite a lot deeper as well, which is positive. And we wanted to essentially, as I've stated in the paper, challenge the sort of notion that house price to income earning ratios, they tell us what housing affordability is like in our region, because on a national scale, as I'm sure you're all aware, that looks like predominantly our region, particularly West Yorkshire, is quite an affordable place to live, but the experience of a lot of our residents is quite different to that. So this study sought to look into that in some more detail, and in particular, what we've tried to do with this piece of work is look at wider factors such as transport, cost of living, and access to employment, and how that's impacting on people's choices as to where they can live and work across the region, and the quality of housing that's available to people. One point just to sort of know is it's a really complex piece of work. There's 3 papers that have come out of it, which will become public as and when the connectivity strategy is published. So at this moment in time, the papers are not published themselves, but we wanted to share these particular findings with the place panel at this point because there's a particular spatial element to them that's quite relevant to seek your views on. The other point that I would note is I think we originally had aimed to try and have some more definitive policy recommendations out of this piece of work. But as you can appreciate, it began in February of this year, and a lot's changed since then, and what the impact of what we're currently going through is going to be on the housing market has shifted significantly and is still very uncertain. So what our research team have done is looked over the last 70 years as to how the sort of spatial labour markets and housing markets in the region have shifted to bring us to where we are now. And so rather than sort of repeat some of what's in the report, I think there's just two sort of key messages I think that I would just bring to your attention, which I think are the main points, which again, intuitively, I think some of us feel that we maybe already knew, but this has given us a regional evidence base to that. The first one is around the point that comes out quite strongly in the reports about decentralisation and suburbanisation of jobs over the last, and housing over the last 70 years. But the fact that these two things, as both have become decentralised, they've not exactly followed one another. And where some jobs have become decentralised, the people that will access those jobs are not living close to them. Therefore, housing might be affordable where they can live, but it's not affordable for people to then get to work. Or in some situations, we've had discussions in workshops about when people are trying to drop children off and then get to work and then come home at the same time. It's the cost of transport is weighing at what people's economic opportunities are across the region, which has been an important point that's feeding into the connectivity strategy work when we're looking at the places to connect and the work that's going into that at the moment. The second point, which I think has come out as the studies evolved, is although the connectivity element is sort of what we set out to explore with this piece of work, is that connectivity doesn't necessarily mean accessibility for people, and the cost of transport is such a huge factor in that we have people that maybe live in the same places where they work, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's accessible if they can't afford to get there. So that's a key component that's coming out as impacting where people are living and working and limiting people's choices as to where they live and work, and where people are living further away from labour markets. Some of the studies findings do show us that the rents and the cost that they're paying for their housing doesn't necessarily adjust for the fact that they're not living close to central business districts, etc. So there is a lot of work to do, and there's quite a lot of variation across the region. So the final point, I think, just to raise out of the studies, and again, I think relates to some of the other items that we've had on the agenda around Towns Fund, etc. today, is that phrase of levelling up, but within our city region and within our district as well, has come out very strongly, the difference between urban and rural areas and where people can access employment, etc. So the next sort of steps with this is we are still working on what the policy implications of the study are, because like I said, there's a lot in there, and it hasn't given us a set of recommendations, given that that's quite challenging to do at this point, but how we put this to best use. So we're working with the heads of planning and the directors of development on that at an officer level, but we really wanted to engage with you as members on what your thoughts are, and any thoughts on how we might potentially take this further at a sort of regional level. And I think, final point to note is it has fed in quite strongly to the place narrative, which we discussed earlier, particularly on that challenges section, in terms of how it's feeding into our investments at a regional level as well. So happy to take any comments and questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. So I've got Amir and Helen both to comment initially. Amir?
Thank you. It is really interesting, and I think you're right, it is really complex, but I just wanted to draw on the sort of the point of if I look at Bradford, for example, in the city centre, the affordability isn't an issue. You can buy a 2-bedroom apartment here for £40,000. It's actually, you can buy one for less than it costs to build one. And that's actually the problem, in that, the ultimate, I think, test to get a market to work, to see if it's working properly, is if you can get people to buy an apartment at the market price and actually live in the same apartment that they've bought. And I think if you can start getting owner occupiers to live in places, then I think that makes a difference. And ultimately it then comes down to, so what would it take to get somebody to buy an apartment or a house or dwelling or whatever it is at the market price in that place. And I think this comes back to the urban design point and this whole thing around what is that mix of things, what is that place like? And I think the two are very closely aligned. And ultimately, the schemes that we work on in my sort of practice is all about how do we reset the market. And we do that by doing things that are really aspirational. In fact, I would go so far as to say the more deprived the place is, the more aspirational the scheme needs to be. But then it's also what are the other facets that make it work and make it a really attractive and rewarding place to live. And I think that unless and until we can kind of get that into the mix, because if I look at Bradford City Centre, there isn't a connectivity problem. You know, you can be in the city centre, the jobs are in the city centre, that isn't the issue. But there's broader issues. So I was just going to make that point, really.
Thank you, Amir. Helen? Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, a very interesting piece of work, and be interested to see the more detailed work as well. You mentioned that there are no recommendations yet, and that's very understandable given the situation we're in. And it's a constantly moving situation we're in as well in terms of the economic impacts of COVID. Is the intention that you're going to try and take in some of that data about the changing situation into the research to actually arrive at a set of recommendations?
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah.
Just on Amir's point first as well, I think, yeah, I do agree then that is something that has come out from the study. And as well, these places are affordable, but the people that are accessing housing in these places at the moment are still not the people that can afford even some of those prices, which is the issue that's come out. So we're finding the places that actually nationally look affordable, using a house price to income ratio, the quality as well of the housing that's in that area at the moment isn't of what the standard that we'd expect, which is an issue. So that does come out in sort of the complex nature of the reports and the work that's done when you put it all together. So yeah, I appreciate that comment. And on Helen's point, in terms of the actual commission, the commission has ended because obviously it was time limited. We already pushed it on an extra sort of three months, which the research team were kind enough to do, given that we had to hit pause for a little while. And I think that's what we're looking at next with groups. And I think it would be good to get the HA's partnership view on that as well, and to bring a bit more of a detailed presentation, perhaps to one of the HA partnership meetings, to look at what the impact of COVID is. The bit of the issue at the minute is the uncertainty of how long this pandemic's going to string on for, and we're going to be in and out of any types of lockdowns, whatever they may look like. So we kind of do want to keep this rolling. I'm not sure if Judith might want to add on that one, noticing she's taken a microphone off there.
Yeah, if I can just add in terms of response to Amir and Helen. Yes, I think one thing the study did show that it's a complicated issue. The whole issue around housing markets, it's not one fix that will fix those markets. I think one thing we would like to do is to potentially explore a bit more work around the private rented sector, and understand in terms of your point, Amir, that yes, some property types are extremely cheap, but it tends to be picked up by the private rented sector market, and sometimes that's not the best quality stuff that's then being managed because it's a very fragmented market. And one of the things that the study did actually pick up, that the urban centres tend to have an element of overcrowded housing, because although a 2-bed flat might be relatively cheap to rent, if you're a couple with 2 or 3 kids, you can afford to rent a 2-bed, but actually you probably need a 3-bed. So there's complications around the market in terms of how that PRS sector works as well. So that might be something that we want to look at as well in terms of how that's working. And then the benefit system sort of skews how the rental market works. And if you are a family that needs a 2 or 3-bed, but you want to get that quality of place, you tend to then move out to the suburbs or to the edges of towns. And that's when your access to work then becomes much more complicated in terms of accessing jobs. So there's a lot in those papers that we now need the time to unpick with various partners, both internally and with our external partners as well, including Helen's partnership, the HA partnership, so that we can get a better understanding. And I suspect that we will need to do a little bit more kind of research and evidence-based work, but we're not quite there yet. But we're pleased with this piece of work. It's a very complicated piece. It does look backwards in terms of what's happened over the last kind of 50, 70 years spatially, and how that's led us to some further challenges in terms of how we might want to move forward. So it's a point in time, and I think now we just need to reflect on what information it's given us, and again begin to understand how we can best use it in terms of moving policy forward.
Okay, thank you, Judith. So very important piece of work going forward, because this is, it's a real attempt to relate affordability to people's real lives rather than the fairly arbitrary formulas we sometimes suffer from, but with, as you say, a lot of implications for future policy and quite a bit more work needed, and some overlaps, I think, with the kind of COVID recovery planning work as well. I'm sure Ian will be picking that up. Are there seeing any other questions or comments on this item? So we are asked to note it at this point. I think there's probably be something we will see the implications of coming back in future reports there. But thank you for the presentation, Rebecca, and thank you for the work that's been done in commissioning and reporting on this. So if people are okay, I'll take us on to item 10, which is the housing update, and particularly the Brownfield Housing Fund and devolved revenue funding, which is one of the first early wins from the devolution deal, I think I'm right in saying. So Judith, can I ask you to introduce this?
Sorry, I'm trying to multitask. Take my mute off as well as just look at the paper. Yes. In terms of this item, we have had an allocation based on a per capita basis of 67 million for tackling our brownfield sites. We also have, as part of the devolution deal, a figure of 3.2 million. And we are now working together with our delivery colleagues to look at ways in which we can take those two programmes forward quite definitely and quite quickly. Having said that, we currently haven't had the detail from MHCLG in terms of the kind of legal agreements or the kind of conditions that go with those two funding streams. But notwithstanding, we are doing a lot of work with districts in terms of looking at the pipeline in a lot of detail. Rebecca and colleagues have been doing a lot of work with our district partners over the last 2-3 months. We've done a kind of strategic ranking in terms of trying to understand and focus in on the strategically highest scoring sites. So we've done a bit of a sift, because we know that even with the revenue funding that has been allocated through the devolution deal, that's probably not going to be enough to move the whole of that pipeline. So we're working very closely. We will be taking back to panel some more kind of detailed work around that at the next panel meeting. But just to highlight that in terms of Brownfield Housing Fund, the strategic outline business case has gone through the CA board. It's been set up as a capital programme within the CA. And again, the delivery colleagues are working with Rebecca and districts in terms of beginning to understand which schemes can move through into that programme quickest. The brownfield housing programme, it's a 5-year programme, but it's not really, because actually we're obviously quite a way through this financial year. We have a spending profile which we've negotiated with MHCLG, but it's still a very tall order. It's still quite challenging to get the spend moving when the pipeline is still in the process of being kind of developed in a very kind of technical, detailed way. And there are expectations in terms of the number of units that money begins to unlock. So I think it's good. It's great news that we've got money allocated directly to us as a CA. It does give us an element of certainty, but what we haven't got yet is the paperwork as it stands from MHCLG to enable us to go ahead and spend. However, we are beginning to move forward quite quickly in terms of planning to have that money into the CA and giving our partners the confidence that we can actually put our foot on the accelerator and begin to move those projects through quicker. So yes, open for any questions.
Thank you, Judith. Helen, I think you wanted to come in.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Judith. Given the COVID situation, are there soundings that the government is happy to be more flexible about this spending profile and nudge this year's into next year's?
We haven't asked that question yet because we're still doing the more kind of detailed work with partners to actually understand what we can move forward quickest with. I think part of the issue was in terms of the housing infrastructure fund, the forward funding bids that weren't successful. I think there was an assumption that we would be able to drop those into the brownfield housing fund, and that just hasn't happened because of various issues. But again, some of the schemes were a mix of brownfield and greenfield sites, so partners have had to disaggregate the greenfield from the brownfield because the brownfield fund can only be applied to brownfield land. And that's caused a certain amount of extra work that's actually required to bring those forward as a separate project. So yeah, there's a bit more work than we thought initially because it's been very much focused at brownfield rather than an aggregation of sites in a place. So yeah, we're keeping an eye on that profile. We will go back to MHCLG if needs be, but we're not quite there in terms of detailed understanding how that profile might actually work across the 4 or 5 years.
Okay, and so if we didn't spend the 5 million this year, would we lose the 5 million then?
We don't know. In terms of the conditions that have come back to us from MHCLG, we're, to be honest, we're not sure. We would obviously be trying to spend that 5 million now. One, because it will help support the recovery, and we do want to move as quickly as possible in terms of getting construction moving and getting our development partners to move and to give them certainty that this money is there. However, we can only move as fast as our assurance process will need to ensure that the projects have got the technical base and evidence base to allow them to move through that process, and that's the bit that we're currently doing now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any others on that? We're happy to receive and note the contents of that report. Thank you. Okay, so item 11 is the flood risk pipeline refresh, and I think Justin is here to introduce this item. Justin.
Excellent, thank you, Chair. I think my sound and video should be okay, but if it gets a bit broken up, just let me know and I'll probably turn the video off or something. So just to run through the item, this is to follow on from a report that was considered at the last place panel. So that talks about basically all our work in terms of flood risk management and our collaboration with partners. This report provides an update on that work and also invites some discussion about how we actually submit and then communicate that with government, thinking again about external communications as well. So just to set the context firstly, as I just mentioned, It's a collaborative piece, so it's the Combined Authority, the LEP, the local authorities, the EA, and a range of other partners that have been working on this pipeline. And that collaboration and that work has really been stepped up of late, most recently since the 2015 Boxing Day floods, but also through the work on the flood review and also our successful work on the Grovedale 3 flood resilience programme, which is kind of nearing completion now. Just in terms of the kind of existing programme, Grovedale 3, obviously there was £20 million in total. Just to recap, since last time, that's kind of well on the way to delivery now. So to date, we've had 17.8 million spent or awarded to 8 projects in total. And that's basically unlocked delivery of schemes of just under £200 million. That's a good success story. I think it's a small amount of money to still be spent, but I think even accounting for the adversity we've had recently in terms of the major storms earlier this year, and obviously the COVID period and the kind of some of the various shutdown processes, those schemes are still delivering on target and on budget. So that's a good success story. And that very much kind of gives us a bit of a springboard into thinking about the next programme's investments, and gives us a good basis for giving government a lot of certainty that we're kind of a safe pair of hands, and we do now to deliver these increasingly complex schemes. So in terms of the future funding, that's again building on from the update report we had last time. So we had a pitch that was finalised last year, but things have basically moved on since then. So we've been successful in securing funding for 4 schemes, 3 within West Yorkshire. They're kind of in a very good position now in terms of funding, and beyond those schemes, also some of the work has basically just developed. The schemes have been refined, and there's also a need to think about how we reposition the pitch more towards a wider business and economic recovery angle, rather than just core flooding and growth, which it was kind of previously in the 2019 version. And there was also a need to think about the geography of the pitch, which does warrant some discussion. So previously we did have a Leeds City region pitch as the geography on an administrative basis. We've had discussion with partners at the flood risk partnerships and also with flood managers, and the view now is that we probably would be better collectively across the Yorkshire and Humber footprint, this is, in working to a more catchment based approach, which is certainly something that's advocated by the flood review, but kind of, I say historically, but recently we've struggled to actually articulate how that would work in practice. For the Combined Authority and this part of the world, the view is that we now move to a geography which is basically the West Yorkshire administrative area, with the addition of the kind of upper catchments from the Wharf and Lower Ouse and the Ayr and Calder. And that's on the basis that there's a clear rationale that those sections, predominantly in kind of North Yorkshire, drain into the West Yorkshire geography into kind of through Leeds. So there is a clear link there and a rationale for us potentially supporting some strategic schemes in those areas. So we've initially kind of sounded that out through the flood risk partnerships, engaged with North Yorkshire County Council, which they're comfortable with this approach, and also York, because it does mean that York central schemes and would no longer form part of this pitch. They would move towards something that would be promoted by the North Yorkshire and York LEP. So obviously, if there were opportunities to collaborate on particular schemes, we still would do. But in terms of the kind of division of labour and how we cut it, I think between the two geographies that probably works best. And again, the North Yorkshire LEP are broadly comfortable with that. I think the only thing to mention is that this approach at the moment is a kind of a proposed approach, subject to it being kind of ratified at the Yorkshire and Humber Regional Flood and Coastal Committee later on in the year, and that's just to fit all the pieces of the jigsaw together, because obviously we can't do this in isolation. The other main change to the pitch is the Natural Flood Management Programme. So previously that was looking at a £6 million pot, which was a broad programme unallocated to projects. Initially we were thinking about increasing that to 10 million as it's listed in the report, But now we're thinking that there probably are two big strategic NFM projects, one in Leeds and one in the Upper Calder catchments, that would warrant being part of that programme. So we're thinking now that that programme will probably end up being around 15 million, with those two named projects as an initial phase, with the broader kind of £9 million pot to be kind of considered and kind of inviting projects into as we move forward. So in terms of the overall numbers, in terms of the pitch, so broadly there's 29 schemes in the pitch, with a total capital value of 176 million and a funding gap of 109, and that has potential to provide kind of enhanced protection to about 3,500 homes, and 2,700 approximately businesses. So it's there's some quite good strong headlines there. And also in terms of GVA Unlocked, it's over, I think it's a 5-year period. We're talking into the kind of the hundreds of millions. And also it does align very well with some of our transport and other regional investments, both in terms of spatial priority areas, which colleagues have kind of mentioned as part of the agenda items for this meeting, and also kind of TCF, so Transforming Cities Fund. There's a very strong alignment there. So I think when we do engage with government, this isn't just about engaging with DEFRA, which in most circumstances it isn't DEFRA that we're kind of looking for the money from here. They've given us existing flood defence grants. It's kind of BAYS, potentially MHCLG, where there is a synergy, or just the Treasury. So further on down the line, when we do submit the final pitch to government, it will be going through all those channels, and we'll be seeking to kind of engage with them through that process. I might try and just share my screen and show you some of the bits on the pitch, if it allows me. Bear with me a second, sorry, because it didn't like this last time. They should be able to see. Right, yeah, so that's the pitch itself. So it's in the agenda pack. Just to run you through kind of the structure of it. So this is kind of a backward-looking piece, just about the kind of the impacts of flooding in the region, looking at reflect on some of the damage and some of the work we've done so far. Again, moving on to some of the partnership work and innovation that we've done historically. So there's quite a strong narrative now for our work on natural flood management. Our aspiration in the Green and Blue Infrastructure Strategy is to be a trailblazer in NFM techniques. Speaking to partners in the EA, I think we're pretty much there in terms of our trailblazing activities. And this work is about going the step beyond that and taking it to the next stage. And then again, this slide just pulls out some of the headlines in terms of some of the outputs. I mentioned the homes and jobs safeguarded previously, but it's also the story about development land unlocked. So potentially, or unlocked or accelerated, sorry. So we're talking about just under 7,000 homes there that are on allocated or sites with planning permission within the benefit areas, that could be supported and potentially accelerated as we reduce the flood risk issues on those locations. The GVA unlocked, and then finally on that slide, there's mention of the carbon. So we're talking about just under 3,000 tons of cubic tons of carbon, sorry, that could be saved over a 15-year period through this program, and that's benchmarking the amount of spend versus what we've done previously through the Growth Deal 3 program. So it's an estimate at the moment, but it just gives you a ballpark and feel for what the type of activities we could be doing. And this slide here just makes a link in with the Economic Recovery Plan, which I think is a strong improvement with this revised pitch, in that it makes that link a lot more clearly in terms of you're working on flood investment to support the wider economic growth. It's just not about solely flood protection, it's about the wider recovery now. And then there's some highlights in terms of the natural flood management programme, the benefits of that particular element, and some particular scheme highlights. So this is flexible, and we'll work up the detail of this with the flood risk partnerships and the flood managers. But at the moment there's 2 on there, so the Brighouse Flood Alleviation Scheme, or FAS, and the Keighley and Stockbridge FAS, but there could be a couple more potentially on another slide. And that just gives you a feel for the geography. So obviously the black outline there is the administrative areas of the West Yorkshire districts, and the 2 lighter blue shadings are the 2 catchment areas I mentioned before. So you see there the link in terms of the tributaries and how they drain into West Yorkshire, and the logic of kind of going for that catchment approach now. So I think that's probably it on the pitch. I think the only thing I would probably like to mention is just the second kind of recommendation of this item is just to think about how we publicise this. Obviously conscious of the news agenda and public minds captured by other events at the moment, so we just need to be sensitive to that, and any views on that particular point would be welcomed. So I'll probably leave it there if it's okay, Chair, and invite any questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much, Justin. Councillor Scullion, Jane, you want to come in next?
I just wanted to endorse the point about catchment geography. Water really doesn't mind about administrative local government boundaries, really, and thinking about the whole catchment from source to sea is really important in terms of understanding how we actively manage water to everybody's benefit. The other thing is really about, as Justin said, about trying to emphasize the importance of wider thinking about infrastructure. The flood management is very much about infrastructure for the economy. It's not just about the hard walls and keeping water in, but it's also the natural flood management stuff is also part of our infrastructure, really. And we need to emphasize that as much as the connectivity of public transport, the digital connectivity, and the highways system. And I think in terms of publicity, these are difficult times. I think that the thread in some ways is about how we're all different agencies, different organisations working together to strengthen the way in which we manage water in the whole area. And the catchment thing, I think, is something that's worth emphasising in the publicity.
Thank you, Jane. I've got Lisa and then Andrew, Councillor Waller. Yeah, Lisa first.
Thank you, Chair. I really just wanted to just to reiterate how important this work is and the impact the work that has already been done has had. Clearly, none of us want to see the scenes that we saw in 2015 again. I know we've had challenges since, but the scale of that absolutely shocking. And I think these measures not only obviously make our communities more resilient to the impacts of climate change, but the way in which we're doing them with the natural flood risk management as well also help us to offset that impact as well. So with the tree planting and the measures that we're taking, as well as the sort of hard kind of physical infrastructure, hopefully helping to ease the effects of that carbon emissions and also to make our communities resilient in other ways for the future as well. So just to say, really, really grateful to the work that we're all doing together to support the flood resilience and to protect our communities. Yeah.
Thanks, Lisa. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow on from Justin's comment about linkages with North Yorkshire, I hope there is a sharing of best practice. I do miss regular meetings with Jane on the Regional Flood Defence Committee, but I think it's important that where there can be experiences that would benefit other parts of the region and other parts of the country, particularly with developing business cases that convince rural communities that this is not just being done to benefit the town city down line, but actually they can be part of circular economy or other aspects which benefit them as much as people downstream. That would be really good.
Thank you, Andrew. I think we're all very aware that the counting business heads model of business case has actually been really quite damaging and hasn't helped to appreciate the cumulative impact that the damage of flooding can have on the economic and social life of our communities. And that's why it's so important that we got the funding through the Growth Fund, recognition of that. Obviously, something we're very aware of in in Calderdale, that it's not just about the individual impacts, it's about the long-term viability of our places and our communities that we're fighting for in this. Helen, you wanted to ask a question, I think.
Yes, I mean, obviously, you know, I think this is great work, and I just wanted to echo the point about people working together. I also think what's interesting is obviously, of course, the main headlines and attention needs to be on, you know, protecting homes and businesses, etc. But there's also a big detriment on historic landscape from flooding and some of the assets that we do have in the region, which also have an economic impact. And so I saw the National Trust mentioned in the report, and I was really pleased to see that, because I think working with agencies such as the National Trust and talking to them not just about properties and protecting historic properties, but the landscape as well, is really important.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, for ourselves in Calderdale, National Trust have been a really key partner because they own some really significant lands in the catchment area. They've been really great on working with us on natural flood management, and much of that, of course, is also about retaining the landscape. I think also in our recent discussion, our flood board, there was a lot of interest also in the biodiversity effects of this, that good management of the water also is about you know, retaining some really important river and waterscape features as well. Richard, you wanted to come in, I think.
Just to say that obviously Craven does a large part of your flooding. We do working with the national parks, everybody else, and working with Leeds at the moment. As we all internalise a bit, because as you know, we're going through local government reform in North Yorkshire, or it looks like we're going through local government reform. Just be mindful that neither proposal really keeps that local area that we know, we understand what's going on in Leeds, we understand that. Whatever happens, the centre of that your catchment and the management of that is going to move further east. And I do think that, and then probably both looking internally at our own devolution deals and not looking across borders. So really keeping that cross-border connection going through whatever happens to local government in North Yorkshire is vital. And this is just one part of it. All the stuff we've been discussing today has to carry on across border because we affect one another, whatever we do.
Thanks, Richard. That's a really good point. I think that's where, you know, things like the regional flood board is really important. But I think that loss of local knowledge is there. I'm a bit of a resistor of massive local government reorganisation. I think people underestimate the loss of local knowledge and local connections that can that can happen in those changes. And I think it's really important around issues such as flooding. I think this report is also very timely, as Justin said. It's quite hard to get traction, perhaps on an issue like this when everything's dominated by COVID. But we absolutely can't lose sight of the continuing threats. You know, Calderdale, of course, we had quite serious flooding just before COVID hit us. And in our case, I suspect in other authorities with regular flood risks as well, like York, you know, I'm very aware of the risks to us of flooding happening whilst we're under this, and whilst our teams are so stretched from the last 6 months of experience that they've had to manage already. So this is a very live issue and very important. We keep on with these asks about the long-term investment that's required. So thank you very much, Justin. I'm not sure there was anything particularly to come back on, unless there's anything particularly you want to pick up.
No, nothing specific, but I think in terms of the comments about joint working, I think we're absolutely there in terms of continuing to collaborate with kind of York and North Yorkshire. We've made those links, firstly on a delivery point of view through the delivery of the existing programme, but also kind of I attend the North Yorkshire Flood Risk Partnership as well as the West Yorkshire one. So there will be that conduit there to kind of exchange ideas and best practice moving forward. And obviously we've got a lot to learn from each other. So yeah, I'm definitely all for that. But yeah, thanks for the comments, and we'll take those on board.
Excellent. Thank you for the work on this. I'm sure we're happy then to endorse the updated priority schemes and take on board the various comments that have been made. And thank you all for your contributions, not just today, but on this going forward. Sorry, Alex, were you looking to come in or just agreeing? Yeah. No. Fine, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Item 12, One Public Estate. Judith.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Panel will probably, well, you will remember that we have been part of the One Public Estate programme over the last four phases, and phase 8 is the latest, released on the 9th of September, with the submission, if we take up the invitation to bid by the 12th of November. We're still working with partners in terms of working up a potential bid. I have to say that the emphasis, as it was in previous phase 7, is very much housing focused, and it's housing focused with local authority land as a criteria for funding. Partners are a bit are less engaged in terms of using this funding for that. We have Brownfield Housing Fund within the One Public Estate. The criteria has set a benefit cost ratio of 1.5. Through the Brownfield Housing Fund, we have to achieve a BCR of 1. So again, we will have to make a bit of a judgment call in terms of the best fund to advise districts to actually go for. But we are working with other public sector partners, looking at projects that might be suitable, and we will be bringing the shape of that bid back to the Chair and Chief Exec Lead Jackie Gedman, working with both the Asset Managers Group and the One Public Estate Leadership Group. What we're seeking through in this report is a delegation to the Chair and Chief Exec Lead and Managing Director Ben Still to sign off the bid at the point where we've done the detailed work with our districts and we have the shape of the bid agreed, because there won't be a panel meeting between now and when the bid needs to be submitted. So that's the main purpose of this paper. So we haven't got any detail around the project, but we have to get the delegations in place so that we can actually submit it.
Okay, thank you. Are any questions, or people happy to agree to the course of action that's shown? I'm not seeing anybody indicating, so we're happy to agree that. Thank you. Taking that as agreed then. Thank you. Item 13 then, planning consultations. Alison.
Thanks, Chair. So this item is the report is just providing you with information really on the government consultations on the changes to the planning system. So it's to let you know as a panel that we are preparing joint West Yorkshire responses to both of the government consultations, and that's in addition obviously to individual responses being submitted by local authorities. So it's worth noting that the timing of this panel hasn't been ideal for getting your input into the responses, but we have worked with district officers who in turn have obviously worked with members in each authority. So we're hoping that a lot of your views have already been incorporated through that route. So on the first consultation, the changes to the current planning system, that one has now been submitted in consultation with Councillor Swift as chair of this panel, and that's the one that's appended to your paper for information. The second one, we had a little bit more time, and that's the one that proposes more significant changes, less immediate changes anyway, the white paper planning for the future. We have prepared, again in partnership with officers, a full draft response to that as a West Yorkshire joint response. We didn't have that at the time of publishing the papers, so that wasn't included in your pack. I am happy to share that following the panel meeting if members would like to see it. Again, we would look for endorsement from Councillor Swift as chair of the panel before we were to submit that anyway. But we do have a window of opportunity here to have a brief discussion and try to incorporate any of your comments that you share today into that draft response. In terms of the paper, so I'm going to assume that most of you are already familiar with some of the content of the white paper because it's been out with us since August, and obviously it's made quite a lot of headlines, and there's been quite a lot of briefing done on the contents of the paper. It is very broad, so it covers plan making, development management, and developer contributions, and we're interested in all of the proposals that are put forward. And as we've seen today, there are various topics that we've already discussed around design, in particular, where I've sort of taken on board the comments that you've made and can have a look at the alignment of those comments with our draft response. So as Helen pointed out with regard to design, there is a lack of detail in some of the proposals, and government seem to be taking the view that it's a starting point, and they seem to be keen to get further input to help shape those proposals. Design is one of the areas we're trying to do that, and so is Section 106 contributions. We've had a couple of conversations with government around that. So I have included at 2.4 in your paper a list of some of the areas that our response focuses on, which I think are of particular relevance to you as a panel. So just to quickly touch on some of those, the extent to which local democracy can be retained under the new proposals is obviously an overriding concern, and that's something which we reiterate where we can through the questions that have been offered to us through the consultation. The public engagement opportunities, again, Helen touched on that previously. They are looking to seemingly front load the opportunity to earlier in the plan making process as opposed to the application process. There could be some benefits in that, but there isn't the detail in there for us to understand how that will work for our places and for our community. So we'll be making that point. We are interested in the design codes. We have no issue with the requirement around putting design codes in place, but there isn't a huge amount of detail there, and we're not just interested in aesthetics, we're interested in how places function, and Amir made some points earlier along those lines. We're interested in health and well-being, inclusive growth, tackling the climate emergency, and all of those things are part and parcel of the design process. And that doesn't really come through so far in what's being proposed. There is also little in the proposals to encourage implementing existing permissions. It's very focused on driving growth and building more homes, but we've made this point repeatedly back to government that we think we have a lot of permissions already in place that aren't being implemented, and there's very little in there around supporting accelerated delivery on brownfield land, which is a particular priority for us as a panel. In terms of the abolition of duty to cooperate, again, that's come up in these in this meeting earlier on. It's a really important point for us, particularly as a strategic authority. We want to understand what that will be replaced with. It doesn't so far suggest that government have got a clear idea on what that would be replaced with. So we've been having some conversations with government about that and why there's a silence, particularly around strategic planning. And then finally, just some concerns about planning obligations. So abolishing Section 106 and replacing with a community infrastructure levy. Again, it's not clear from the proposals whether we will secure the same level of infrastructure investment as we do now through the proposed new system. So we're seeking some sort of one-to-one conversations with government on that issue, because they clearly still are working through the detail of what's proposed there. So that's just a quick canter through some of the issues which I think we are putting back to government through our consultation response that you may be interested in, but please do give your views on other aspects, all those aspects, and I'll do my best to integrate those into the draft response.
Thanks very much, Alison. I think I saw Peter indicating. Peter, you're on mute.
Sorry, I think it's a shame we're dealing with as the last item on almost a 2-hour meeting. This is the most significant thing this committee will ever see, probably any planning committee you'll ever see, because it's fundamentally shaking the relationship between central and local government. It takes away enormously the powers of local authorities. It means that our involvement in determining housing allocations and priorities is minimalised. The public's involvement is reduced to a point where the determination of the local plan where the public is most unlikely to get involved. So the public's views are being minimalised. I think it's got huge significance for the future of all strategic planning that the government would take this power away. In other words, really, we already have the most centralised system in Western Europe. This takes that even further. So the involvement of both public and local authorities is reduced to a minimum. So it is very much like, you know, handling the deck chairs on the Titanic. We're looking at design of buildings, not anything strategic. That is going to be stripped away from us and taken back to the centre. As we know, the centre is not particularly good at designing anything strategically. We witness the current situation with the handling of the pandemic. So there really should be an outrage and strong statement coming from all of our districts to respond to this minimalisation of local authority involvement in the planning process.
Thanks, Peter. I think many districts have already said something similar to what you've said there. But
well, we have.
Yes.
No, please have.
And Calderdale, certainly. Lisa, you're looking to come in?
Thank you, Chair. I think Peter's picked up all of the points around local democracy, both for elected members through councils, but also for local communities. Just to really emphasise the points that were made by Alison in the introduction. The proposals don't actually do what they set out to do. So the idea is to promote growth. The blockage is not local authorities. The number of permissions that are already granted and then built out is the problem. In Leeds, there's about 29,000 permissions not built out. So there's a huge amount of development that can take place. It's got permission to take place, but developers are sitting on those sites. So I think there's that point really very firmly needs to be hammered home in the WYCA response. I'd also just like to pick up on you know, how maybe some suggestions around how we might actually deliver on that issue. Looking at land value taxation, it's not currently, there's no incentive really for the developers to deliver the properties that they've got permission to build. And another key thing for me is the lack of narrative about the climate emergency in the planning white paper. There is virtually no reference to tackling the climate emergency. I would suggest that's partly because the government has a deadline for meeting its ambitions that are so far into the future that they don't think they need to take it seriously now. And clearly we all know that they do need to take it seriously now. We're taking it more seriously locally, whether that's WYCA's 2038 deadline or Leeds' 2030 deadline. So I'd really like to see the WYCA response being very firm on the climate emergency as well, and the need for any reforms to the planning system to have that at the very heart of what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you, Lisa. Yes, certainly we should pick up that point about the climate emergency. Are there other comments on this? And a couple of comments in the text supporting the line broadly being taken as well. I'm not seeing anybody else wanting to come in. I think the point's been well made. Alison, anything you want to respond to on that?
Yeah, just thank you for your comments. That's really helpful. So I think we will also be preparing a covering letter. So we are a little bit limited with the questions that government asked. Some of the questions are a little bit obscure on the proposal. So some of our priorities we've weaved in as best we can through the direct questions that they've asked. But we're going to be preparing a covering letter as well that hopefully will draw out some of those points that you've just raised. On the climate emergency, we have been quite clear in our response that the proposals must not prevent us meeting our locally derived targets and asking for further information on the proposals. I think that the silence really on the climate emergency, there are references to it in there, but I think we would have expected that it would be driving these proposals in a way that just isn't seen. So yeah, we will make that point clearly in our response. So thanks for all your comments.
Thank you. I just feel there's a lot to play for on this, doesn't it? There are some supporters of the government's position, but it is clearly starting to create a huge amount of controversy. I think particularly around the question of housing numbers and the allocation of that. But it is this fundamental argument of whether seeing the planning system as the tool which will solve the housing crisis, when I think most of us would argue that the evidence is quite other and the issues are quite separate to that. Thank you very much, everybody, for those comments. So then we're happy to endorse the actions proposed. I'm seeing plenty of agreement to that. I think that completes all the items on the agenda. So can I thank you, everybody who's contributed and for your time today. And our next meeting is in January. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm not sure if we have any informal meetings planned in between. I think there may be issues we want to pick up and brief on if necessary. But thank you very much. I'll resist making any comments about what might happen between now and January because it's much too early for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Bye-bye.